Hey, everybody. It's so good to see y'all. I'm Rodney McMillan. I'm the chair of the art department here at UCLA. And yeah, it's a pleasure to see you all. And it's my distinct pleasure to introduce Gelare Khoshgozaran for this talk. In many ways, I felt like I met Gelare before I met Gelare because I met their friends first. I was traveling for a friend's 40th birthday party, and I met Salar and Roshi. And it's true today, it's true forever. You can learn a lot about a person by the friends that they keep. And these friends, excuse my voice, I'm a little nervous. Um, um, and these friends were amazing. They're smart and they don't suffer fools. And I think the thing that struck me the most was how committed they were to, in their daily practice of living and in their deeds and practices, keep to a truth and to a truth in the face of power. And these are characteristics that echo my experience working with Gelare. Professor Gelare Khoshgozaran is an artist who works in film, video, installation, and writing, who engages in histories and legacies of exile, migration, war, and dislocation in their art practice. Prior to their joining the UCLA art department, and in addition to a robust art and writing practice, they gave lectures throughout the region and in other states, in such places as USC Roski School of Fine Arts, the Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle, Washington, California State University, Long Beach, CalArts, and the Vermont College of Fine Arts, just to name a few. Professor Khoshgozaran completed a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography from the University of Arts in Tehran, Iran in 2009. In 2011, they earned a Master of Fine Arts degree at the University of Southern California here in Los Angeles. Professor Khoshgozaran has stated that their work, quote, engages with the legacies of imperial violence and that they explore narratives of belonging outside of the geographies and temporalities that have both unsettled our sense of home and make our places of affinity uninhabitable. They identify as undisciplinary and work fluidly across a variety of sites and contexts. Professor Khoshgozaran was an artist in residence at the Delfina Foundation in 2021, which resulted in them having their first European solo exhibition. The exhibition, titled To Be the Author of One's Own Travels, included 2 new commissions, a 16 millimeter film installation and a short film, The Retreat. That film has been screened extensively at such venues as the Villa Medici Film Festival in Rome, Italy, MoMA Doc Fortnight Modern Mondays, an evening with Gelare Khoshgozaran in New York. It also screened at the 19th Berwick Film and Media Arts Festival in the UK, where the film was also the festival's winner for the 2024 New Cinema Award. In addition to that award, Professor Khoshgozaran was the recipient of the 2023 Andy Warhol Foundation Lace Lightning Fund. In 2020, they received the Graham Foundation Grant for Individual Artists, and in 2019, they won the Louis Comfort Tiffany Foundation Award, to name a few. Professor Khoshgozaran's work has been exhibited widely at such institutions as the New Museum in New York, Queens Museum, the Hammer, which we're now in, LAX Art, now known as The Brick, and Human Resources, both in Los Angeles, Plug In, ICA Winnipeg, Cell Project Space London, Loop, Barcelona, Spain, and Museo Exteresa Arte Actual in Mexico City, to name a few. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to my esteemed colleague, Gelare Khoshgozaran.
Hello. There will be more things briefly. Just setting my timer. I can say a few things. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's really good to see all of you on this, Wednesday evening. And thank you, Rodney, for that very cute and generous introduction. I appreciate it. So the film that we watched, I wanted to open with a work that really sets the stage for both the tone of my practice, but also methods and formal considerations. And a lot of my interests. And I think Men of My Dreams, this film from 2020, really kind of captures that. And a little bit about the film: it was shot entirely on Super 8 during the pandemic, during the lockdown, and I was commissioned. There was an exhibition that I was invited to, and it was canceled due to complicated reasons, and also the shutdown happened. So I was invited to think about correspondence and the letter format, and interpret it however I want, because the curator had reached out to artists and commissioned them for art that could be put in an envelope and sent around the world when we were under lockdown. And it was called Queer Correspondence because, there was, I'm not going to butcher his curatorial framework, but initially the invitation was anything that would fit within an envelope that Royal Mail in the UK would send with a flat rate. So the dimensions and the sizes were the limitations that I was working with. And this was a time that there was a lot of saturation with online viewings and people leaving their work for free online, which is amazing. But there was a lot of both pressure to catch up on all that was available to you. And also, we were obviously very overwhelmed with looking at our screens, teaching, working, making work, etc. So I made this film, and I copied it onto USB flash drives that would fit within the dimensions of the envelope. And it was sent around the world to 600 plus recipients. It was just a gesture for both making the work available and giving people the liberty to watch and spend time with it at their own discretion, as opposed to having a set time online, but also thinking about film as sort of an open letter. So I wrote this letter, and it could be, written to a queer ancestor or dead or alive, somebody, a collaborator, a lover, whatever. And I chose Pasolini because I realized that there was a lot in my practice that was inspired by both his work and life, and so that was the whole premise of the work, that it was kind of addressed to an artist, controversial one, problematic, but very interesting, who was also murdered. So all the men in the film are men that have influenced my political and cultural understanding, and they formed my political and cultural subjectivity. Many of them queer, political activists, either persecuted, their life was taken by cancer or terminal diseases, or in the case of my own father, cancer survivor. So I was thinking about masculinity in a wide way, from a like a queer perspective, and thinking about the parts that I'm attracted to, but also in relation to the body and a deteriorating body, and the history of the global South, kind of left writing, literature, organizing, filmmaking, that I'm very inspired by, but kind of putting them all together in dialogue in this dreamscapes. I'm ready for the slideshow when it's ready. I mean, I can talk about this longer. Oh, thank you. Okay. Here we go. So I'm going to give an overview of some of the work, obviously, and mainly focus on a few pieces. And as I mentioned, there is some sort of a epistolary dimension to my work. I think about cinema, among other forms that I work in, as sort of an open letter, in the sense that it's you're invited in a some kind of communication or address between the artist, specific people, but also, once you kind of you're given a chance to look in, you're already part of the conversation. You can arrive at it, hopefully, from your perspective and take away what you would like. I'm going to start with a brief quote. A friend meets me on the street. He was born in the United States. He left there during the Vietnam War. He had refused to go to war, so he came to Canada rather than to be put in jail. Agitated over American foreign policy everywhere, but mostly in Nicaragua, he says to me, quote, I'm cutting off diplomatic relationships with them, man. I'm not even going to talk to my family. That's it. There's a whole bunch of Caribbean countries too. I'm severing, you hear me, severing diplomatic relations, unquote. Diplomatic relations. That is what any of us in the diaspora has with these nations we were born in, the ones we live in, and the ones we're supposed to belong to. The most fragile diplomatic relations. This is an excerpt from Dion Brand's A Map to the Door of No Return, which is a book that has deeply influenced my ways of thinking about diplomatic relations, among other things, but also home, mapping, site, place, location, dislocation, poetry, solidarity, struggle, feminism, to name a few. This is what I use. This was a project that is titled The U.S. Customs Demands to Know, in quotations. And it's an ongoing project. I often work in film and media, but sometimes I use objects. And when I use them, they're mostly ready-made, everyday objects that make sense for particular aspects of my practice. So these are packages that I had received from Iran over the span of, by now it's been 12 years. And initially it started as a way of gaining access to some of the archival and personal material that I needed for my research, this particular project that I was doing with a newspaper. And over time, it kind of the content of the boxes became secondary, and what became a lot more interesting and illuminating, literally and figuratively, were the boxes themselves. As you can see, there's a lot of marking on them. They carry a lot of stamps and sort of these markers of their travel across different borders. And as Rodney also mentioned, exile is a space that I think through a lot, not just as part of my biography or my personal narrative, but as a potential space to think about nation building, to think about borders, my favorite topic, violence. So these were, I started accumulating them over time. And each one of them is kind of unique because it's less of a, it's just corrugated plastic that they cut and staple together, and it goes through whatever it goes through. And because Iran and the US are under, they don't have any diplomatic relations. For those of you who may not know, there's no embassies reciprocally in either country. And similarly, there are no sort of reciprocal laws of, mailing and shipping and trade, etc. Thankfully, we don't have McDonald's in Iran or Starbucks, but it's really hard to send and receive packages. And since 9/11, there's been this, as we've been living in the continuous state of exception in the US, it's been illegal for the US Post Office to open any package that arrives in the US without a warrant. You guessed it, certain, departure points, certain countries are under more scrutiny than others. So it's more likely for a package to come from Iran to be open as opposed to, I don't know, Germany. So these packages, at the moment, I have 19 of them, and the, con- the contents of them also changed over time with different projects, but also some of it got really personal. And then at some point, I received quite a few of them because I was trying to finally, after I got my permanent status in the U.S., I decided to finally move my entire my entire book collection, my library here. Not going to get into the details of that or what that project was about, but mostly it was about rebuilding something that had been really missing from my life, but also the way that I think about knowledge and memory, and the amnesia that was sort of caused by the severance of not being able to have access to home or return, and kind of reclaiming that and being like, okay, kind of like a traumatic past, like I didn't want to see you, but now I'm ready to sit with you books and read you. So the boxes are, yeah, like I mentioned, there's 19 of them, and they're lit from under, and that's the way that I exhibit them. They are arranged differently based on wherever they're being on display. This is a show currently up at MoCA. And it's ongoing, as I mentioned, and it's very kind of telling of the state of foreign affairs, specifically between Iran and the U.S. The delays by which I received them, whether or not I'm able to. And the first slides also had to do with once I attempted to reciprocate and send my parents something, and it was sent back to me because of embargo laws. Another project that also had to do with a similar theme, which was at the core of it, it's about sanctions and it's about economy. I was there was a period in Iran that there was a lot of airplane crashes due to the sanctions. The U.S. sanctions on Iran have been since there's debates over that officially since the 1970s, well, 50s, 70s, 90s. Every 20 years we get a different blow. And it got much worse during the Obama administration, and then all sectors of metal, steel, copper, and aluminum were entirely under sanctions. And as you can imagine, those were the metals that were needed in producing and replacing airplane parts. And when you're under sanction and you can't even buy from anywhere, let's say except for Russia, that puts literal lives of civilians in danger. And this project had to do with kind of thinking about both like a childhood space of these airplanes that my uncle, who worked for an airline in Iran, he would bring back these kind of puzzles that they gave you on the plane that you had to put together. So it kind of, I was interested in like tying that sort of like memory play scale of the airplane parts to actual lives being taken and the violence of that, and how both of them were parts of the everyday experience of many. And this installation, as you can tell, it's on the floor, and there's 700 plus pieces of two kinds of airplanes, one by Airbus and one by Boeing, that I reproduced in those four elements of copper, aluminum, steel. Well, the parts were just in those two, and then there was a metal piece in the exhibition. But the other inspiration for that was this military air base outside of Tucson, Arizona, which is where a lot of decommissioned, faulty, older airplanes are stored. And those aerial photos of those, the site was kind of a reference for this. I was trying to almost recreate a photograph out of these tiny little sort of toy airplane pieces. And I used the floor of the gallery in a way as a sort of the background for this installation, because This is the same way that the desert in Arizona is treated by the U.S. military, that they use the sand and the subfloor and the quality of the soil and the dryness of the desert as like a found object. And they store the airplane parts there because it doesn't need any kind of extra preservation from rotting and oxidization, etc. This was called Boneyard, which is what the site in Arizona is also called. This is from 2019. Oh, yeah, pointer. Yeah, right. So back to my notes. I mostly work in film. I work in the lower ends of production value, and that's intentional. I work a lot, but work slowly, and that's also intentional. I need a lot of time to reflect between projects, and that's the only way I can work. I do a lot of things besides art and just teaching. I appreciate personal narrative only for the purposes of refraction. If it doesn't provide me and others insights into the entanglements of our struggles, our lives and deaths, it's simply not interesting to me. And that's the kind of novels I like, the films I enjoy, and the art I appreciate. This is a drawing by me since when I was 4, probably 3. And these are just from the images that I saw on TV from the war between Iran and Iraq, in the middle of which I was born. I was in Tehran, so it was a pretty urban landscape, and I think the left part of the drawing is a lot more reflective of my actual environment, and the right one with the palm trees and the kayaks or whatever it is on that river with like random flowers on top. I don't know. Those are most likely things that I saw on TV, because all you saw on TV was war and the news of the war. And this is a photo from the actual war in this area called Shatt al Arab, which is southwest of Iran, and that's where the arbitrary border between Iran and Iraq is established. And the whole war was around this area. And Saddam Hussein wanted to take it, and Iran was like, no, this is our territory. 8 years later, 2 billion lives later, the border didn't change. This is a photo from the Riverside County Fair and Date Festival. It's an archival photo. Don't remember the exact date. This is a photo from Mecca, California, and this is the space where, this is a site mostly where I was shooting my film. These are some stills from the film, archival photos from the Date Festival, Genie in the bottle, you get everything, they hit all the marks. And this is also still from the film. So the film, which was actually commissioned by the Hammer and made in LA in 2018, it was the first time that I had an actual budget to go out and make a film, however modest. And it was the first time that I thought about making a film and not just a video, and really think through the documentary form, what I could do with it, my critique of it, but in a way that a lot of my work, I try to consistently do that, but specifically in this case, it was important for me to be on the site and go through the bureaucratic process of getting military clearance, to be at the military site and experience this viscerally. So I'm going to keep it brief because this project is from 2018 and there's plenty of information about it already. But this was based on, inspired by how the palm tree and especially the beheaded palm tree in the desert was really jarring and unsettling for me when I came here, because it was a clear signifier of the time of war for me. And then the drought and the dryness of California. I got really interested in the history of date palms, not just the palms that you see in Beverly Hills, but what was the role of the date palms in the desert? What were they doing? So I got into this research hole, and I landed in 2 places. One of them was the County Fair and Date Festival. that was initially started to introduce palms, date palms in California, and also kind of create this like desert oasis, oriental tourist destination for the locals, where you get to, get on an get on a camel or elephant, not elephant. I think they only had camels. Yeah, camels and elephant. I don't know what they referenced. They thought probably India, Iran, it's all the same. But you got your exotic camel, you get your elephant, you got the ladies, and then there's the palm dates, and it was kind of a product placement of what is this exotic fruit that they're trying to introduce into the markets, and then starting with date plantations and kind of making it an industry. That's still going on. And so I went and visited the fair that was still going on as of 2018 when I was making the film, more or less the same. That architecture is still the same. Um, and also the other kind of strand of this research was obviously, the US military is also very kind of cognizant of the similarities of these climates. And they use the same environment for as what they call immersive military training. It took a while, but I was finally able to get access to one of these. They call it the archipelago of Middle Eastern towns, which is just a simulacrum where you have caricatures of the language, the people, the culture, etc., and everything is set like a Hollywood set, slightly more detailed, but pretty much that's the premise. And this alley was particularly shocking and unsettling for me because this is where they put on a show for you, and this alley was supposed to be a souk or like a bazaar and it was replicated after in an area I believe I heard from people who had done some research. It's kind of imitating a location outside of Baghdad in Iraq. And they had hired newly resettled refugees from Iraq and Syria to play extras in this scene, where, whatever narrative they have of the US military training, to play extra in this scene. And I really wanted to go through the horror of that. And, none of the people were recorded on the film, and that was intentional. I wanted to go back and see this place, this haunting place, as opposed to documenting the people without their consent, or like the whole premise is so fraught that consent is not even relevant. So the film, what it does is that it goes into these areas without really introducing the location specifically, but it's overlaid with these narratives that I got from interviewing U.S. veterans who had fought in Iraq and Afghanistan specifically. I put a call on Craigslist, and I hired these folks to sit with me, and I interviewed them specifically asking about their memories of color, smell, whatever they remember from the landscape, as opposed to getting into the combat and the action drama aspect of it. So their narratives are kind of woven into an essay, and they're read over by voice actors, each corresponding to the person that I interviewed over the film. And it ends in a dream scene where I'm wearing a military outfit, and I resemble a child soldier from Iran during the Iran-Iraq War, and I'm sitting in the desert, in the Mojave Desert in California. Right. Back to my notes. I collaborate a lot, always with time, often with places, and sometimes with people, friends and lovers. I love queer elders, the real ones, the feminist ones, the ones who asked as many questions about the here and now as the there and then. This poem is by Etel Adnan, who was a writer, poet, and painter. I'm not gonna share her biography. She's quite well known. And this poem by her at the end of the Arab apocalypse has been quite influential in my way of thinking about working through violence and going really in there and coming out, and like what that means in terms of a perspective as an embodied experience, and an engagement with sites of violence. So the work that this refers to is, it's called To Keep the Mountain at Bay. And this is, again, another short film that I thought of as, if not a letter, more of a, like, not an obituary, but sort of a monument to this person that was really influential in my thinking about poetry and art, who's absent, who also lived in California for years, for decades, but thinking about Sausalito and like the calm, sort of, serene shore, and the ocean scape, and thinking about her absent, and trying to kind of recall her. And I thought about, if there is a memorial to Atelatnan, what would it look like? And it had to be ephemeral, and it had to have two of the elements that she was most kind of obsessed with in California, which was the Tamalpais mountain, the mountains in general, and the Pacific Ocean. So the film was a collaboration, where I invited and commissioned a few folks to write in response to Atelatnan, and then some of my collaborators, friends, and kin to read poetry that was written by her, June Jordan, and this Iranian poet, Nima Yushij. Simple installation. I learned from Arabic, Persian, and Spanish poetry, Spanish language. Most importantly, I continue to learn from Palestinian literature and Palestinian cinema. I have written 3 essays using only screenshots from the films I've watched over and over, or just once on my laptop. I'm invested in form, not just formal ejaculation. I'm interested in critique, but I find an essay a difficult kind of art. I'm bored by all the PDFs attached to the walls of galleries. This is an essay that I wrote also in 2020. Thank God. I mean, the pandemic was awful, but how much time did I have? All my dream projects came through in that year or two. I had so much headspace. I had so much catching up with all the things that I wanted to do. So this was sort of an initial prompt for myself to think through. When I say form, I was thinking about the syllabus as a form. And anytime I write a syllabus, I think of it as a piece. I don't know for whom, for myself maybe, because students don't care. They just follow whatever weekly assignments they have. But I'm really interested in the syllabus form curatorially, because you're pairing reading with visual work, with history, with, I don't know, news, your own practice, students' practice, the group, whoever that is. And this syllabus was, or the syllabus format was kind of a beginning of, I would say, a chapter in my work where I was thinking really through third world solidarities in relation to anti-fascism. And also the histories of fascism in the global south, outside of the European context and the way it's been mainly focused on. So this was kind of a 21 film selection, and some references to essays that I thought were kind of in conversation to one another and would open up a way of thinking through cinema as a way of not just, I start this essay by saying that, we know very much what fascism looks like, but when we think about what an anti-fascist sensation, aesthetic, or approach, or a cinema images would look like, there's not a lot of clarity around that. I mean, that's a good thing. We don't need to pin it down, but I feel like it would be good to have those kind of conversations of like, what does it mean to engage this at an aesthetic level, if it means anything at all? And next slide. So this is one of the screenshot essays that I mentioned. It's 70 slides from different movies that I had watched, and I have this practice of taking screenshots obsessively. It's more difficult right now because a lot of streaming platforms don't allow screenshots, but when it was not a problem, I hoarded a lot on them. But also as an editorial practice, it was quite fascinating to kind of be thrown, thousands of slides and be like, how can I make a narrative between them? Because these cinemas, these histories of cinema are in dialogue with one another, but how can I kind of think about a subject through these different narratives? So the one on the top is from Elia Soleiman's The Time That Remains. The second one, I think, is like a 1960s Italian movie whose title I don't even remember. So I wrote this one. This was the first one, and then another essay that was more kind of it was more focused on cinema itself and like all these kind of reflections through these films, people talking about cinema and the obsession with cinema. And a third one that is more of a class analysis. If this is like the subaltern, the second one is the filmmaker, and the third one is like, I don't know. It's not out yet, so I don't want to talk much about it. It will drop at some point this year. Okay, how am I doing on time? Okay, 27-minute mark with the 10 minutes, 37. So maybe I will talk for another 5-6 minutes and I will share some excerpts. So this is the last film that I finished before the one that I've been finishing. It's in post-production. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this one and a little bit of background again. I think through exile as a space of encounter, thinking, exchange, and organizing, shared alienation. That's why I'm interested in the movement of people, but more so of objects, sites, location, dislocation, and memory. Sounds, music, smells, and food. Language, accents. Where we arrive from, and not just to, make me understand a place and being. I just want to make sure I'm on track with this. Yeah, so like I want to pause a little bit on this film, which was part of the essay, the screenshot essay. This is a film by Fassbinder. It's one of my favorite films of all times. Probably it's called Ali, or Fear Eats the Soul. And this has been very influential in my thinking about exile, in the way that it defines space, and it creates an encounter where this German woman by the name of Emma, I believe, wanders one rainy night, into a neighborhood bar where she would have never stepped in. And it's a bar where immigrants, migrant workers, sex workers hang out. And there's a scene in which she enters and all the eyes turn out to this like white German woman walking into this place where like all these people have been hanging out, and it's not very common in a segregated city. And he gets up and plays on a record by Sabah, the Lebanese singer and musician. And that scene kind of like it's like 2 or 3 minutes of the music, the record crackling and starting to sing, and it's a really beautiful and unsettling again way of demarcating and thinking about space and thinking through space and alienation, and kind of the reversal of these roles of when sort of the minorities make their own space and then the dominant kind of character walks in, and they start a romantic relationship and it goes haywire, as you can imagine. But the opening scene of this film, I think, has always stayed with me, not just in its like in the way that it's shot, which is gorgeous, but like the way that sound is being used, and the space is created, and the tension between the characters, and specifically the woman and the rest of this community in exile. So going back to this project, my film, The Retreat, which I'm going to talk about briefly, started with this essay. So just to be clear, I don't sit around for funding to appear because it just doesn't. So when I can't make a movie, I write. And that often helps me a lot with research, with putting an outlet, and also putting out seeds of this is what I'm thinking. And it's free. I often don't get paid, but at least it's something that I enjoy, and it helps me put my mind together and kind of think and be able to put out what I am interested in if I am invited to make a piece. So this piece that I wrote again in 2022 was inspired by the film and thinks about this anxiety of exile and the impossibility of return, but also what's possible to make in that negative space of not returning and being away. And outside of just this really tired framework of nostalgia and longing, but more like, I am here. Who can I talk to? What can I see? What can I learn? And what does this vantage point allow me to understand both there and here? Another inspiration for the project was Maria Lugones, the late Maria Lugones, who was an Argentine feminist philosopher. And she wrote this book called Pilgrimage. I believe this was like either the late 80s or early 90s, where she has a critique of it's kind of a very classic like woman of color critique of what travel means, and besides the criticisms of like all this um, tourism and food tourism and the movements from the global north to the south in a way that is exploitative and problematic, she kind of flips it on its head, and she says, no, wait, hold off. That's not the only way of thinking about travel. That's already a colonial way of thinking about travel if you're just thinking about having a passport and crossing a border. Whereas, as women of color, as she puts it, again, like in the time that she wrote this, she kind of theorizes travel as a way of visiting one another's world, playing and listening. So that was kind of another source of inspiration for me when it came to the project that I was working on called The Retreat. I'll get to this briefly. Another inspiration was Gulliver's Travels, obviously, because I don't know if I can get to that exactly, but I'm going to skip over this part and more focus on The Retreat. So for The Retreat, I was interested in thinking about how I can recreate this moment and possibility that I am no longer afforded, which is that creating that kind of cafe in Berlin where you stumble in and you see people that are from different backgrounds. There might be language barriers and all kinds of other barriers and cultural differences, yet you can have an exchange and have a conversation, and out of that exchange again comes a different understanding of the place that you're in. Not only do you learn about similar experiences and how these histories of violence are materially entangled by the person that's standing in front of you and speaking to you, but also think about what comes out of the syntax of being in this space and having this exchange. So I put out a call. I was approached by Delfina Foundation for a project. I proposed a film. They were incredibly graceful in the sense that they were like, this is a set budget, take it and do whatever you want. We can't be engaged in this, like whatever it is that you're trying to do, which I really appreciated. And my curator was very helpful with that because he was the one kind of trying to mediate between me and the institution, which was very chill compared to a lot of other institutions because they're very small. But I was like, yeah, I want to put out a call. I want to get a bunch of people who are experiencing exile, broadly speaking, but not metaphorically, together, and we will come together for a week. And during that week, we will get to hang out and play and cook and live together. And a film would come out of that. And I don't know what that film would be. I don't have a shot list. I don't have anything. And with the budget that they gave me, I was only able to have one assistant and one person who would help me with like the craft of it, which I will explain briefly, and then 3 people invited in person. So we had a series of, I got incredible applications from 90 plus people, which I didn't really see coming. Out of that came a smaller kind of reading group where we would meet 3 times a week, 3 times, sorry, over 3 weeks. And then out of that group, only 3 people were invited purely because of budget and strict like logistical reasons to meet in south of France for a week, where we cohabit, where we cook and exchange and have dialogue and play. And the reason for the location was this history of institutional psychotherapy that I was very interested in, which was a very brief period of. It's been described as a utopian project, which in some ways it was. Obviously, it has its own problems and shortcomings and blind spots, etc. But this psychiatrist by the name of Francois Tosquelles was someone that became very interesting to me, and this history of the asylum in Saint-Alban under the Vichy regime in France. I was very curious in the sort of the one moment in history, at least one of the examples that I knew, where the word asylum as in the archaic term as a mental institution, and asylum as a refuge were overlapped because he didn't believe that the political was separate from the psychological. And of course, this was Saint-Alban was a hospital where Frantz Fanon, for example, studied with Tosquelles and spent some time. So the sociogenetic, etc., all of that is in line with this, if that's where you're thinking. And this started in the 1950s and continued until the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. And in the 80s, it kind of had its ripple effect in different parts. Qataris, influences come in, and I'm not going to get into all of that. But I wanted to go and visit this site of the hospital, which was still active, and it had a really robust art therapy, or as they refer to it, ergotherapy program. So I chose a location that was driving distance accessible to the hospital. And so the film basically turned into us, a group of exiles, taking these walks around, having these exchanges and conversations, going to the hospital, of course, the campus of the hospital, which is huge, not like going into territories and being weird, but there's like a public cafe. There's and it's also on a trail, on a hiking trail. So it's a pretty, and there's a chapel. It's a public space, and just spending time there, looking at the art and having conversations in that site about exile, immigration, mental health, and asylum. And oh, that's the laser. I'm going to skip over some of these. So the film, which I'm going to show perhaps 5 minutes of, what time is it? I'm at the 4. Yes, I'm going to show you 5 minutes of the film. And we'll check back in to see how much time we have after that. So yes, please. Oh wait, I have it. It's on me. I need to go. Okay.
what happened when we went to the cafe to get water. There was also like obviously patients there, and suddenly a person came in. He said hi to everyone by like hands. We went out, and then he followed us drinking coffee. So Mati started like talking to him and stuff, just like asking, "Hey, how are you?" And then he looked at me and he's like, "Are you like in French? Like, are you Tunisian?" And like I smiled and I told him, "No, I'm Palestinian." And then he suddenly started speaking Arabic to me. بالصحة is like we say it, and especially like North African, like Algeria and stuff, like بالصحة, like with like safety and health, like how are you? Are you here? Like everything is okay with you? I'm like, yeah. How are you? It's like he was like so excited when he knew I'm Palestinian, and he's like, yeah, our countries are miserable.
What was his name?
Sofian.
These are the things that happen, I think, when I visit a place, when I read about it, I would have no idea that, like, who is now in a mental hospital these days. Like, you can never say, like, demographically, but to think about the history of this place and, and the World War II and who they were giving shelter to, and now, Sufyan telling you our countries are countries, like, that really reflects what has changed in the last 100 years.
It's really true that all of us are in exile somehow. We are always somewhere that we think we should be somewhere else, because there is no return to original of something. That thing doesn't exist anymore. How can we go back to it? So that's why you live with the feeling of exile. For me, غربت is exile.
Okay.
For me, it's okay.
But this form of exile that
Tab'id has khurbat in it, because if you've been forced to go somewhere else,
Yeah.
you already feel estranged and you already feel distance.
Yes. This is also the hosting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
to see a gharib or ghariba, like a stranger, is like to take care of them when they are at your place,
Yeah.
in your home. It's like this doesn't apply to ours.
It's exactly the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah. 55-minute mark, so maybe this is a good time to break into Q&A. That's okay. I don't want to keep you all night. Just a note on that. So folks will be going around and choosing who will ask questions. I would appreciate questions before comments, and I would prioritize students. So if you're a student, please. And if not as well, but ideally. I'm also happy to do like technical or money talk or whatever. Don't be shy. Like I didn't really get into that, but floor is
Hello.
open.
Hi. Thank you again for everything with the talk. I was wondering, thinking about short-term convening and people to come together to form a community, and thinking about how this can be something that might last for a day or a week, or this brevity, and thinking about the how generative that can be, or just like wanted to get your opinions on thinking about how convening as a shorter experience is still or something that can be just as generative or more so than things, and considering art and how people think about something being long-standing versus something that is maybe more brief. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think there's a lot of benefits to it shorter, because it was at the end of that week that the dynamics got a little too familial, and like there was a bit of tension between people. So actually, I think if you're dealing with strangers, well, strangers, relative strangers in this case, I had never met any of these people in real life. We just landed, bam, in Marseille. I met someone in a hotel lobby, another person, at a cafe, and we just had to deal with each other for a week. I think there's a merit to that, because that time is limited, and in that brevity, actually, I think a lot of kind of problematic and maybe more difficult dynamics don't, take over. But also, what I would say is that this was, as short and as kind of guerrilla style as it was organized, there was a lot of, we did a proper risk assessment, and, we had some, like everyone was insured. There were kind of not a ton, but there was a lot of kind of considerations as to how to make it more manageable. But I would say, in terms of the brevity of time, if anything, that was just the right amount for this project. And this is the second in a series that I think I consider Men of My Dreams, The Retreat, and the third film that I'm trying to get funding for. I see them as like three films in a series of exile, and the third one as well. I'm thinking of organizing a similar sort of not a retreat but a convening, and in terms of duration, I'm exactly thinking between 7 to 10 days, but also budgetary, to be very like detailed. Renting a car for a week, renting an Airbnb for a week. You get the weekly discounts, and also in terms of payment, because to be clear, everybody was paid for their participation, both in the online group and the engage and the travel to France. They all received a stipend on top of the, well, economy, but like the lodging and the flights and everything that was covered. And also they all signed an agreement form. There was very clear kind of expectations, and also descriptions of how I would be shooting them. And it took a little bit of time through the online readings and the engagements that I was able to gain their trust that this is not another refugee film that I put you in camera and extract your most traumatic experiences in life. I'm not the USCIS. I'm actually just a filmmaker, and I want to be in dialogue with you. So a lot of the conversations and everything came really naturally, and everybody was aware that I will not be shooting their faces or like a lot of bodies. It would just be hands and distant, like kind of long shots, and that made it a lot more comfortable for them to be themselves. And even with the voice recordings, we recorded a ton, even like conversations where we were just lying on that grass and like chatting for hours. But it was always, first of all, I had a sound assistant that was there with a boom mic, so there was no way not to see him. But also, everyone knew that every single word of theirs that goes into the film, they have the right to just even later change their mind and say, I don't want this. And I think those things really allowed for a genuine space of exchange.
Hi, Gelare. Thanks for the talk. I had a question about like collaboration and collective filmmaking. It seems like so much of the project is about like the sort of collective meaning making of like what it means to be in exile. And I was curious about like how that impacted the editing, because ultimately you are the filmmaker, and so much of the meaning in like this kind of filmmaking comes through in the editing process. So I feel like there's a lot of responsibility there that you're taking on, and I'm just curious how, with all of that, how that impacted the editing process and what that was like for you.
That's an excellent question, because for the third film, I'm actually thinking of it as collective filmmaking, where I will be commissioning people to make films, and then my contribution would be those three films, and mine kind of making its own, but they will be able to make their own films and edit their own films, and we will all help each other make that. With this one, I didn't really consider it collective filmmaking, and I was pretty clear about that, and that's why I paid people. Not that payment makes their authorship, like annuls their authorship or anything, but I kind of made it clear that this is my film, and I want you to be a part of it as somebody who speaks and exchanges and like shares their experiences with me, and you have all these liberties. However, all that I did towards the end was that and there was moments in the kitchen where I was like, hold the pot, do this, like little bits of kind of like, don't clear the table because I want to get a shot of it. But again, there was no like secrecy in terms of what I was shooting, but of course, like the way that meaning comes together is in the editing of these projects, not in the shooting of it. But before, all I did was, before the film would be distributed and shared and screened anywhere, I shared the draft with everyone who was a part of it and asked that they're okay with that. So that was kind of, it was more a matter of consent than like their artistic input. But I'm thinking for the next project, it's very tricky. I think like collective filmmaking is something that I don't really have experience in, and it can get really messy. But I'm aiming for that in the next project, to be like, hands off, what do you want to do, let's do it. And then my thing would be bringing these things together, and I will have my version of it, which mostly comes out of editing and contextualizing and commentary, if that makes sense.
Hi, hi, Glory. My question is kind of practical, and it has to do with gaining access to spaces for filming. And I guess I'm specifically thinking about the military set you worked with. How do you talk about your practice when you're trying to gain access to those spaces, when maybe being honest about the kind of critical approach you're bringing might limit your access?
You don't talk about it. You don't talk about it. Um, and not out of, you know, it's not like a sinister thing, or like I'm not trying to hide anything, but So there were two things. There were two sets of stakeholders that I approached differently. One was the folks that I interviewed, which they were strangers off of Craigslist, so I didn't really want them to know much about me, but I was also not getting much about them either. I was like, you can be under a pseudonym, you can be under your name, you can just be under, an acronym, I don't care. I will just be audio recording you through this conversation. And some of them contributed actually, there was a friend of a friend who gave me his writing response because he didn't want to be in an interview with me. So those folks, I didn't really give much of my personal background and like why I was interested in this. I just said, I'm working on an experimental documentary about landscapes in California and its similarities to the Middle East. And I have these questions about your memories of the war. Obviously, a lot of it turned into really intense therapy sessions, which I was not really ready for. But I took all of those meetings in like public, places, and just to take, like safety measures for myself, the other person. And so that was kind of what I shared with them. And then when it came to, and I credit them at the end of the film just as they had chosen to. And they didn't really follow up to see the film or anything. They didn't really care because they were also paid for the hour that they spent with me. When it came to the military side, that was a whole process because at the moment I was not a US citizen and my name was 4 parts and I was from the axis of evil and it was like a whole thing. And they do have the US military has these public tours of their they call installations. And many of them used to, I think the one in 20 Narcops is a different thing, 29 Palms. At 29 Palms, they had these community days that, some artists did some projects there too, like this is like 15, 20 years ago. But then this particular site, which is called Fort Irwin, which is the size of Rhode Island, it's not the size of Rhode Island, it's the size of the state of Rochester. Don't quote me on that, but it's either or. I think it's Rochester. It's huge, it's massive. And like you go in the desert and like you think you have hit the end of it and then you get on a bus and they take you another 30 minutes and you just arrived at the beginning of the base. But anyway, that's irrelevant. I applied online through their form, the community form, to just visit as like a civilian. I did not get in the first time, I did not get in the second time. And also, I don't live in the desert, so I need to have like accommodation, and I'm also bringing 2 collaborators. So, I needed proper time to schedule that. And also the Hammer Museum is like, where is your file? I'm like, I don't even have access to the military center. Hold off. Well, I didn't say that. I was like, there's some technical problems, whatever. I will get there. It's fine. But then, the third time, I think we got in touch with, like, we did some like investigative stuff, finding the person who runs their community outreach place, picked up the phone and was like, hey, I've been bumped out like twice from this visit. I really want to visit. So she helped and I think like put my forms through. They didn't ask for a reason. They do not ask for a reason because they take pride in the state-of-the-art military training that their soldiers are getting. And right now the UK troops are there, by the way, doing some immersive training, trying some new drones. Because I get Google alerts for them. Because I want to go back and visit. That's my weirdness. That's my thing. But yeah, so they don't ask for a reason. And the third time that I got access, I showed up obviously with 2 other gay individuals. We're like, hi, we're here to see the military. And they're like, oh yeah, welcome. They gave us the spiel, like this is it. There's a video, and like everything. And I was there with a Bolex camera, which was the most handsome person in that whole group. And like, so all the soldiers are like, oh, that's really cool, whatever. So like the whole conversation went around the Bolex and how cool it is. And I was like, great, this is my boyfriend, talk to it. And so yeah, I mean, we got there and there was just like simple protocols. There were just like no filming at entrances, no filming at this other location. Everything is fair game because the YouTube is full of these videos, but mostly with like on phone cameras. So it got to the point that I'm like, they're cranking the Bolex and my other friend is like on a Super 8, and like the soldiers like, it's gonna come, the explosion is gonna come. I was like, I don't want the explosion, but thank you so much. I actually want the explosion to be left out of the shot, but thank you for letting me know. So I was like cranking as the explosion happened. But that was kind of, I also wanted like another kind of, like, this is a tangent, but I wanted to be on a war zone with a camera that has historically been used by, like, journalists, because you can change the film in daylight. You can, you don't rely on battery or any kind of like anything like that. So you can rely on the camera and get what you need to get, except that there's these 30-second or so losses of the images. And I really wanted my aesthetics to be determined by that economy of the camera and not get the full shot, all the details of what's happening there, because that's what they want. But what I'm looking for is something very different. So I would let the camera determine what shots I'm able to get. Of course, there's editing and all of that, but even at the prior stage to that, I would like to work with those limitations. So yeah, once we arrived there, it was all fine, and there was a moment. The reason why we got that alley so empty was because they were doing another part of the tour was shooting guns, which we were all like trembling and we were like, no, how do we dodge this? Like, we can't be like, you eat the MRE and you go and shoot like AK-40, I don't know, whatever they have, one of those acronyms, big guns. You would shoot them, and then it was awkward because like you were there to kind of celebrate the military, and the soldier came to us and was like, oh, you guys are not interested in shooting. And I was like, I don't trust these amateurs. I don't want to be around these amateurs. And he was like, oh, good thinking. So we meandered our way into, I don't know where I came up with that, but we meandered our way through and it's like this buff soldier. I'm like, yes. We kind of meandered through the alley, and that's where the scene had ended, right? Like the spectacle of it was gone. It was just like weird haunted place with wind blowing and like fake, plaster bread and whatever signs they had, and that's how we got it really empty. But overall, yeah, no, I would say, in a lot of these situations, say less, because then you will corner yourself in situations where you will need to explain a lot of things, unless it's unethical, unless you're like doing something that you don't have consent for, or like you're catching people in a vulnerable position, whatever. But this site is a site of violence, and I wanted to get what I wanted from it, leaving the parts that I didn't want behind, but also capturing the ones that were relevant to the project. Sorry, that was a long answer, but yeah. Say less.
Hi, Gelare. Thank you for the talk. I'm over here.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I was just wondering how you thought about like the timing of your text in the like video work, but also in the slides, like going from when you were speaking about writing essays in between not doing or not filming projects, and then maybe using some of the words from those essays in the videos, but specifically like how you're thinking about the pace of them. In relationship to like the image and also like the sounds that are happening from the soundscapes, but also like the clicking of the projector. And also, I don't know if some of them they were like texts from other writers, and like how are you thinking about that in relationship to your writing and your work? Sorry, that was kind of like two questions.
I caught three. So the number one, the first one had to do with pacing and text. It's always a dilemma. I'm almost never happy with it. I think Man of My Dreams, this file is called V6 after I had a final file because I kept like changing things over it. That's why I can never work in the way that filmmakers work. That's like you have a festival premiere and the file is out. Like after the file is out, I need to see it and work so much on it, because then I will be able to see it as a viewer and to see like how what that experience is like. But I exploit people in my life by subjecting them to see the rough drafts of a lot of things and be like, is it accessible? Is it readable? Is it horrible? So kind of with the pacing, I think, because a lot of the writing and stuff is in our heads when we make the work, like I know the text by heart, so I don't need to follow it. But what does it look like to someone who hasn't? And that kind of feedback really helps with a lot of the pacing. In terms of the position of the text too, I think, like with Man of My Dreams, I wanted it to be right in the center because I wanted it to be kind of my speaking from the middle of the frame. That's for pacing. When it comes to using other people's text, it's a thing that I do a lot. So like the retreat, the part that I didn't get to talk about was that the beginning text, which is about 3.5, 4 minutes, it's not even my text. It's a friend reading excerpts from this book called The Invention of Morale. I can talk for hours about that book, but I'm interested in looking at literature that speaks to the subjects that I want to speak to without me having to rewrite it. And another point about dislocation, I want to bring this text from the 1940s by an Argentinian writer into 2023 US film made by an Iranian, because again, I want to make a point about these connections and the fact that there is so much to learn from that literature that I don't need to reproduce. In terms of citing it and crediting it, it always comes at the end with my credits that, this excerpt was selected from X and Y and Z. So that's how I would credit it, in addition to making it italics, in writing it in italics to make it kind of distinct that this is not my text and I'm reading somebody else's. So that was two, and there was a third question, which was, let's see, so using other people's text, pacing. Can you say it without the mic? I will hear it. I'll try. Like thinking about the text in relationship to the images that you're using. Yeah, so it's different with, yeah. The sound, yes. So the sound, I work with people who know what they're doing because I don't know what to do with sound. But I really, really love that collaboration because I've sat with the image, I have the text, and then it's kind of like a dead corpse, and then you give it to a composer, and it really adds a whole other dimension to it, and I really like that, and I usually work with people whose work I like and trust, so I don't need to micromanage them and tell them, this is what I want, this is what I don't. I kind of let their interpretation of the images lead their composition. Oftentimes, I've been lucky to work with people who both compose and do the mixing. So the process is that I make the film and I have the recordings of voices, etc., or parts that I wanted to use, like with the tennis scene in Man of My Dreams, I wanted to use Foley, which is kind of making fake sounds that it's as if I'm playing tennis. So that part I specified, or like the bird sounds that I'm using are from a Pasolini movie, Hawks and Sparrows. And I wanted to take those sounds because I wanted to kind of bring almost like his voice through this character of the birds that he had made. So some of the original like sounds that go into the composition, I tell like the person that I'm working with that I want to work with X and Y and Z in these parts, or like the mood is such and such. But yeah, they do their work. And the crackling here, because the titles, I was also using Letraset, which I don't know who in this room knows what it is. It's kind of like this old school like vinyl like pressing and copying that was used in graphics and film. I wanted that to be kind of like the crackly old sort of Letraset to reflect the sounds of the records that we also sampled from and used in the composition. Yeah, so it's a mix of these things, like preferences, some ideas, but then handed in over to a composer and then going from there in terms of a dialogue and a back and forth, if that makes sense.
Unfortunately, the time for Q&A is over, so we just got directions.
I'll see you outside. Thank you so much for coming.